do PowerShell. So this is the tips and tricks, and I am DBA Duck. I don't think I put anything in here that this is the sponsor slide. So if you haven't had a chance to say thanks to the sponsor, just let them know. These things don't happen. You've heard this all week. Doesn't happen without us, without them. And we get together because we have them, which is great. All right, so this is the Yay Me slide. The only thing you really have to worry about is I have a SQL PowerShell website on the bottom right, and then my email address is always open, no matter when. 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 1 year from now, tomorrow. I'm pretty good. I'm bad at technology as far as I don't take breaks from technology, which is a problem. My family will tell you that I should not do technology as much as I do, but I can't get enough, so my email address is open to you always. All right, this is the agenda. Looks pretty interesting, but we're going to talk about arrays and strings. This is the thing that trips most people up, and again, the context you'll get when we talk about it. Pipeline mastery. Pipeline's fantastic. We'll see. We'll tell you where it might break down. I've heard this all week, so I felt pretty good about putting this in. Functions and parameters, objects and output formatting, and performance in parallel, and then hidden gems and quick wins. I will preface this with most of this will work in 5.1, and there's a few of them that are specific to 7. So you'll be aware on the slide. I believe I call it out on everywhere that's different, but running on 5 or 7 is important if you never get to run 7. That's going to be important for you to pay attention to that. Those of you who get to run both, just 7's a fantastic way to do it. So arrays and strings, really, PowerShell's made easy as far as you can do lots of things that maybe you shouldn't. But you can. In a pinch, they work fantastic. When you're talking about automations where you're going to deal with large objects or many objects, some of these things can break if you don't optimize them. And that was the point of this tip. So really you think about the tip of PowerShell, everything in PowerShell is immutable. So you think about immutable, and I used to think that the word meant something different, and it doesn't mean that. It just means they can't be changed. So when you think about an array, we all know the array syntax, results equals at parentheses, parentheses. That creates you an array. And under the covers, it has a type, but that's your shortcut to getting you an array. And then you can just plus equals, right? Results equals plus equals, get server info, and it just adds it to the array. What you don't see behind the scenes is what .NET does to it, right? But PowerShell is written on top of .NET, and .NET has rules to follow. Rules to follow are, they're immutable. So how can you add an object to an array? We just use plus equals, and it just works. You're like, it does. You're absolutely right, it works. What happens behind the scenes is it destroys the current array, creates a new array with all the objects. So imagine I'm doing it to 10, and you're like, I don't care. What happens to the old arrays is they go into the garbage collector. So again, with larger objects, or with many objects, you are polluting that garbage can. And in my neighborhood, the garbage collector only comes once a week. Now again, hopefully .NET doesn't do that, but again, it's one of those things where you're flushing things into the garbage can and you're waiting for the garbage collector to come get them. That means that your shell is getting bigger and slower because it has to destroy the array and build a brand new one. Destroy that array and build a brand new one. So that's a problem. That can be a problem. So it used to be that I could do this demo, and I'm not going to get into demos unless we have time. That's why the slide has the demo. I validated everything works, so you can go and take this and run it for yourself. But the idea is that I used to do 10,000 objects, and CPUs have gotten pretty good since then. But it used to be that you'd go from milliseconds on the good way, and then the avoid way would be seconds. And that was interesting. Now you have to do more objects, so 100,000 instead of 10. and you'll see the same thing. So if you run these demos, you'll see that it definitely makes a difference. So there's two ways. This one way you should not get in the habit of doing it. You should get in the habit of doing it right. Even with a few objects, you're still better off because you're using memory better and you're not polluting the garbage can, okay? On the do this side, there's two ways. One, and actually there's three, because you can use a generic list, which is a super fast way to do it. There's also an object called array list, system.collections.array list, and array list works this way too. The difference between the array list and this is that generic list requires an object type.
And as you can see in brackets, you can see the object. So I have to give it something. Well, everything in .NET inherits from objects, so object works. It works great. So you can use a generic list if you'd like. Otherwise, you could use an array list, okay? So the idea is that they're memory structures. So when I add an object to the list, it just adds it to a memory structure and it allocates the memory as it needs. It doesn't throw them away, doesn't destroy them and then add them. It does nice things. So this is way faster. And in the demo I did with 10,000, it actually was milliseconds to do this with 10,000, which you want. You don't want seconds. That's terrible. So the idea is that using memory structures, you are on top of .NET. This does work in 7. The .NET structure did not change to eliminate this. The only caveat that's not on here that I want to call out is that a lot of times .NET objects will emit output. So the idea of .NET is that you want to know something happened. So whenever you use an array list, it actually will output the array index that it just added. So if you add, it will pass 1, and then you'll get 2, and then you'll get 3. Well, you don't want the output. So in this, I would just add a null equals, right? $ null equals, and then call it, and then it eats the output so you don't see it on your pipeline. You don't want those on your pipeline. But that's where they'll go, is they'll go with the output stream, and you don't want that. So cool idea. Be okay with a little more text. The syntax of shortcut plus equals, great for down and dirty, I just need it done, because I'm just going to close the shell, perfect. When you're doing automations that you're going to deal with databases and you're going to deal with objects that contain data, they're bigger, which means you should think about doing it the optimized way. So cool tip. The same with strings. So here's the strings one. Strings are immutable as well. And they are a little more efficient. .NET has gotten very good in the late 4.x days of not being so horrible at speed. But every time you plus a string together, it actually deletes the 2 and adds the 1 together, and you get a new string. And deletes the 2, and then gives you a new string. So it gets rid of the old string, puts a new string together. Old string, get the new string together. So again, garbage can, yep, all the way there. Smaller strings, again, you get away with it. And just because you get away with it does not mean it's okay. Now, it might be okay to you, but I'll tell you, your shell gets bigger, and the whole purpose of these tips is scale. You want to be able to run this against double the amount of objects and not die because your shell got too big. Now, I live in a different world. I'm a SQL guy. So a lot of DBAs will run this on their database servers. And that's okay to run SQL stuff in PowerShell on your database servers. The problem is that memory is valuable on a SQL server, and so scale becomes my mainstay because I want less memory footprint, because the last thing I want to do is cause SQL to have to give up memory because Windows said, hey, this guy out here, he's using PowerShell, and he's sucking up a lot of memory, and I have to have more memory. And so he asks SQL to give it, and SQL will give it. That means that SQL gets impacted. So I typically run automations very lean and mean when it comes to my SQL Server. So this is all about scale. So the plussing together of strings, again, just is that you ditch the strings and add a new string. Ditch the string, add a new string. So the string builder object is another thing like the generic list or array list. It actually has a memory buffer. And in this case, I don't declare my memory buffer size. I can. So there's an argument that lets you pass in a 64K or a meg or get a buffer, and then it will fill that buffer and then it will allocate more. So again, for scale, speed, get an idea of how big your string buffer needs to be. And the string builder can actually have this buffer, and then it will allocate more if it needs it, but get good at tuning that. But again, the string builder is a memory structure, not a get rid of the string, create a new one, get rid of the string, get a new one. So it's just nice and tight. And then at the end, you just get it with sb.toString, and it outputs whatever you put in there and the way you did it, right? So it's really kind of slick. We all do this, and this is the interesting part of the tip. And I wanted to do a performance thing, but I didn't have a chance to get the performance thing built. But the idea is this. It's very common to use a string. Double quoted means we can replace variables inside the string, right? That's cool. The other idea is that we have to do this funky thing inside of a string to get it to do objects. So we have to do the $ parenthesis, $ object dot something, and then that goes in our string. And it looks kind of ugly, right? I mean, look at the example. We have the server here and the DB, and then we have a t.toString, and we want to format it with our n2. And that's nice. It's a beautiful thing. But it does a lot of interpolation stuff when you go look at it. To try to get the idea of what it's doing is kind of a little harder. So instead, we use this -f or -format, right? -f is just because there's no other shortcut that's F. But format lets you pass in a template that's .NET-y. And I know we're in PowerShell. But if you haven't gotten used to the fact that you're in PowerShell and .NET, you got to acclimate a little bit more, because you want to leverage .NET, not say, I'm writing PowerShell, and you are. But every PowerShell engine is written on top of .NET, so you want to acclimate to this tips and tricks inside PowerShell to use .NET. That's the biggest message here. So if I do a template here and I say single quotes aren't replaceable. Doesn't matter. Single quotes gives you a literal string, and you're just using it as the formatter. So curly bracket 0, curly bracket 1, curly bracket 2 with a formatter, n2, and then an s on the end, and I pass it to the format and the server, comma, db, comma, t. What? I don't have to do .toString. No. Remember in .NET, if you reference the object, it always calls toString if it needs it to be a string. So that's the default method on your object. But in this case, it's easy to see with my format template what I'm actually intending to get. I'm going to get the server. I'm going to get the next one is the DB. And then I'm going to format this 2 with an N2, which means a number, and I want 2 decimals. And all of a sudden, I pass in server, DB, and T, and I get my beautiful output that says I have 1.23 and stuff. And like I said, if we get to the demos, we'll see. You can also do an alignment with a 0, -20 and have it actually go like this. You know, I want them right formatted, and I want this. So you can do a lot more with formatting than just trying to do it in your string. Just nice to do that. And then the last thing for strings is a here string. And I was like, what is that here string? I mean, is there a there string? Is there something? What is a here string? Well, it came from Linux. That's what they call them in Linux, where you actually start a string and then end it with IOT or something at the end, or EOF at the end. And it's really nice, but it gives you the ability to have this multi-line string. You will see people in code do this at without this at. They'll do a beginning of string, and then they'll do multiple lines, and they'll do an ending string. And it does work, but not always. So when it doesn't work, you're going to have a problem. And it all depends on variables you put in there or something like that. So if you're going to do a multi-line string, it's really nice for us SQL guys because we can build a query. And the query can be nicely formatted. I don't have to have it in one line. And I can have things in there, $ blah, and do a string replace like up above. Or I can pass it to -f. So I can actually do the curly brace 0 in my string and then pass it to dash F after a here string because it's a string and let that happen. The benefit is it's readable. So when you start doing HTML stuff and you start doing bigger text things, the here string lets it be readable, but PowerShell understands that as soon as it sees the at symbol and the double quote and enter, you're in a here string, which means multi-line until you see the quote and then the at sign and enter. Once that takes place and you follow those rules, it's a multi-line string that is so readable, so usable, and usable forever. It just goes into a variable. So that's how you avoid plussing strings together as well, if you want a query that plusses things together. You shouldn't plan on plussing things together anyway in .NET anyway, because they're immutable, right? So this gives you a way to have a nice formatted, readable thing and have it be in one string with multiple lines. Nice. Doing this, you could do this in String Builder. But again, you'd have append line, append line, append line. And how readable is that for you to go back and modify something? Insert a new line or do something else. Not super friendly. So here strings are great for that process. All right, this is the other cool thing about PowerShell, and this is not about performance, it's all about navigation. So you have an array. Again, if you comma separate values, they automatically become a PowerShell array. So it's fantastic. The items 0 just says arrays are 0 based. So that's good to know. And so the first element is 0. So it would be alpha in this case. -1 is like, wait, you can have negatives in an index? Like how? It's real. It's the last one. So if you want to get to the last one, you don't have to know how long or how many there are. You've probably seen people go square bracket and then do array.count. -1. Okay, you just do -1 and you're going to get the last one. So that's kind of a cool navigation. You can even do ... and go, you can get sub pieces of the array. Like, wait, what? When I saw this, I was like, that's got to be a typo. I mean, I don't think that's possible. In PowerShell, you can get delta and epsilon by doing -2 ... -1. It's like, wow. They just go backwards. -1 is the last, -2 is the one before that, -3 is the one before that. Okay, that's cool, but I can get 2 elements out of this array by a ... It's cool. 0, 2, 4. I can get 3 elements out of my array without having to do them in separate lines. Just give me the 3. Okay, great. So kind of a cool little thing. And like I said, you've seen the array with the reversed and you do -1 and then negative items.count. You're like, oh, okay, that's fair. Super cool in the way that arrays work. But know that you can slice them with negative numbers. It's just kind of a cool little tip. Pipeline. We all love the pipeline. This is why, I mean, even Jeffrey talked about the pipeline. Pipeline is one of the powerful things in PowerShell. The thing is that pipelines abide by rules. And rules are that when you pipeline objects, it takes what's on the left and passes it to the right. But it doesn't just pass it. It's not like a baseball where I throw it over the fence and I don't have a baseball anymore. In PowerShell, the pipeline says, give me the baseball, you hold on to that, I'll clone it, and I'll pass you a baseball. So now I have a baseball, you have a baseball. Then you go, see, baseballs are small, we don't care. Okay, so we'll back up and say, I have an elephant. Clone the elephant. I'm going to toss you an elephant. And you're going to have to deal with that. Okay, what happened to the shell? You have 2 elephants in the shell now. One that's not going to be used anymore because you cloned it, but it had to pass it by value. It doesn't get to pass it by reference, not in the pipeline. Pipeline is reference by value, so it passes the value, clones it, pushes over there, and now I get to deal with that. Now the goal of the pipeline is that you should be getting smaller as you go to the right. If you're adding things to the elephant has a baby after you pass it. And now you're going to pass the elephant and the baby. Okay, you just got bigger. So the goal is object to the left, filter to the right to where you get your output of the last pipeline, and that gets sent back to the output pipeline. Okay? So the idea is that you get process, where object, we have a where clause, we saw it today, and we say name equals PWSH. Give me all the PowerShell processes. And it gives them to me. That's great. What did it do? Again, the array concept. I'm only doing it for 10. I'm okay. It's okay. Until there's 20, 40, 100, 50,000, 100,000. And then you start going, God, the script's a little slow. This is the same thing with the pipeline. It's easy to go pipe, pipe, pipe. Because it used to be back in the day when we were on 2.0, where people would, it was the one-liner episode. I can do that in one line. And the pipelines were like, you're like, yes, you accomplished that. Thank you very much. It was cool that it's a one-liner. But do you know what you did to the shell? Well, no, I mean, I did it in one line. Yeah, yep, okay, got it. Now I know what your goal was, and I'm moving on over here. Scaling is not your principle, and that's fine. Scaling wasn't your goal, and you weren't going to get it. But you did it in one line. So be aware that what you're doing is not always best practice or helpful to the shell to keep it lean. The goal is lean in, lean out. That's what you want. So what we could do instead is get process with dash name and PWSH. Now it's filtering it in the commandlet and filtering it inside it saying, I only want these. So now I only get these. Instead of passing the whole set of processes over to the next guy to say, where this is that. Sometimes that's what you have to do. Because you're not looking for a name, you're looking for a property. And that property isn't a filter on get process. So what choice do you have? Not a lot. Well, you kind of do, but in the beginning you don't have a lot of choice to do that. So sometimes filtering by way of the commandlet is much better for the tip. In the bottom you'll see that there actually are little things that PowerShell does for you. I could say get process into my procs thing and then say procs.where. Now what difference does it make if I do procs.where or pass it over the pipeline? The idea is I'm not making a copy of it. I have one copy. I just happen to use a .where on that object. That now I can put a filter in my where, and it will do it on the base object, not on my pipeline copy of the object. So now I haven't duplicated it. I've just filtered it in line. So that's kind of cool. And the other idea is that you can do a for each the same way. So if you look at the end of the first line in the bottom, it says where working set is greater than 100 meg, dot for each. Now I don't have to do for each object and say name in process. I can just do a for each right off there, and if I'm just going to do something and output the name, I don't have to pipe it to select. I can just say for each and give me the name, and I get them. So little, not as well known things that you can do, but every cycle saved is a cycle earned. So if you're taxing your CPU because you can, then scale goes out the window. That's not your goal. And if your goal isn't scale, then if it works and that's your goal, great, it works, and that's your goal. So just be aware that some tips that we talk about today are about scale, performance, stuff like that, and some of them are just like syntax things where you can get it. But this is no pipeline overhead to use these methods, which is super awesome. I will never tell you not to use the pipeline. The pipeline is a very powerful thing, and sometimes you have to. Just be mindful of it. Don't just think it's this thing you can batter and it will just love you. PowerShell will just work, but your results might vary. All right, calculated properties. If you think about the idea of making a calculated property, this I've used a ton in more than just this way. But the idea is that every select object has an ability for you to pass a hash table to it with certain parameters inside the hash table, name and value pairs, that will let you build your own output value. So look at the first one, WSMB, which is working set divided by megabytes. You get working set bytes into get process. So I want to say get process, and I want to select the name and a derived column or a computed column that says WSMB is my name. And again, this is shortcut to fit on the slide. And you've all used it. You all understand the principle of most significant property, right? Or most significant character, where if a parameter is computer name and there's not any other parameter that has computer in it, you can say computer. You can even shortcut it to C. If there's no other parameter that starts with C, PowerShell will parse it and understand that you meant computer name by virtue of C. So in this case, N is name. There's also an alias called label, so you could do L. And then the E is expression. But again, when you're down and dirty, just getting stuff, you don't want to have to type extra characters. These do not actually tab complete because they're just a hash table. So you don't get that luxury. So N and E work great. So N is name, and you put your name in there, and E is an expression, so it's in the curly braces. And I say math round, and I do working set divided by 1 megabyte. You can see the $_ which means current object. And then I close my curly, and it becomes a column. The name is WSMB, and my value is what's in my E. All of a sudden, I have the ability to dynamically create my own columns in this case. Now, what could I do based on what we heard the last hour? I could, if I always do this, I could add me a dynamic parameter to process by updating the metadata and saying, update this type, and say, I always want the WSMB on a process object. And let the engine do it for you. No select, no pipe, none. It just happens because you've updated the type data. So yes, it's not in the slide, but that's a thing we just heard that is actually a very viable option to get your property without having to do a select object. But nonetheless, this is the tip. And then you can sort that object because now you've created it before and piped what you had out. And this is an example of adding to your size because you didn't filter the objects. You just said get process, pipe it to this. So you actually created a bigger object on the back end. But again, that isn't the point. What problem were you trying to solve? Every time I get process, I want to see WSMB, not bytes. I don't want to have to look at it and do the commas in my head. Oh, then you've solved your problem perfectly, and it works out great. Or you can do, I haven't used this a lot, but I felt it was worth saying as far as the T object. Anybody use T object? Yeah, okay, yes. It's a piece of cool stuff. I just see a different word when I see T object. so I don't use it a lot because I haven't dove into what it is. But this is important because you can split the pipeline without running it twice. So it's kind of a cool thing when you have this object. But we all know about first 20. T object variable top 20, so I can take the T of it and put it in this variable. And then I can do, at the end, I say top20.count, and all of a sudden my variable has the count of what was in there. So it is a cool way to split the pipeline without doing it again to get my T object of top 20. So it's kind of a cool idea. Computed properties are inevitable, I'll just tell you. The idea of this slide was that you shouldn't be afraid to get what you need. PowerShell's very dynamic and very fast. It's already got the object. You're just taking properties and doing something with it, and it's very, very good at that. So don't be afraid just because you don't have a property on that object. You can either build a proxy command, as we saw, or you can use some trickery like this to get you what you need for computed properties. This is a 7, so at the top it does say PowerShell 7. So just don't try to run this at 5 because it will bar fetch you because there is no such thing as a nullable scenario where you can nullable coalescing. But the idea is that you can coalesce, and if you've written .NET at all, or SQL has coalesce as well, you can go from non-null to just using non-null, or the question mark to return the right side if the left side is null. So if you were coalescing, you get the first value that's non-null. So if user config is not null, then it won't even do the question mark, it'll just return you user config. If it is null, you'll get default config. So it's a way for you to configure your stuff, your script, to get you what you expect if it's going to be null in this case. And you don't know if the user's using this. They may not pass this in. They may not have an alternate config. But you get to set this default config that will always happen if they didn't have another config. So now you know your script won't break because you have a non-null thing and you can call methods and properties on that object. So coalescing is pretty cool. There even is a coalescing assignment statement, so that's even weirder. But again, these are really about how can I use PowerShell a little more advanced, and can I get my way with the ability to use command structure to get what I need without being so rigid that I would then assign, I would do an if null equals user config, then why would I do that if I can do it in one statement, right? One of the coolest statements in .NET is the crypto statement. Question mark, this, colon, this. If then else, right in one line with just little question marks and colons. That's what this is. It's coalescing. So it's really nice to have one little quick statement that you can get without having to belabor your poor little engine. All right. Let's go further. We're on 3. Yeah, we got to speed up a little bit. So function parameters. We've heard this week that commandlet binding is a way to get you what you need and to bind things. The biggest piece is a lot of people don't use commandlet binding when they build a function, and maybe they just don't know. But the tip is this. Using commandlet binding gets you more than one thing. So there's a principle in PowerShell of splatting. We'll talk about splatting in a second. With commandlet binding, it won't let you splat a value that doesn't exist as a parameter. It won't. It binds it to the function and your parameters. If you leave out commandlet binding, you can pass in a hash table of splat and say Ben equals Bob. And if there's no Ben parameter on that function, it will just ignore that. Here's the problem. If you don't use commandlet binding, you don't get verbose. You don't get debug. You don't get what if. You don't get error action. You get all that for free with commandlet binding. All you have to do is specify it in the top of the function and you're good. So cool feature. Just know that, and the other thing you get is the process and the begin, process, and end, which we'll show you in a second. So don't forget, if you're creating your functions, just put the little commandlet binding up and decorate your function to say I'm using commandlet binding, and PowerShell does all the rest under the covers in the parsing. So you don't have to worry about any of that. But you get it for free. It's a part of the deal. So it's kind of cool.
Does it allow you to use your function in the pipeline then? Because I saw you had that little note at the end of that slide. Because this is pipeline for both fleet. Can you normally use your defined functions in a pipeline?
So the question is, do you get, is pipeline part of that? Yeah. Being able to pipeline objects? Yeah. Yes, because commandlet binding opens up the begin, process, and end. Okay, so you want that, and then verbose, obviously. In this case, it says verbose. So you get those because you did commandlet binding, you get those. Otherwise, yeah, it's going to be interesting to pipeline to a function that doesn't have commandlet binding. All right, validation. The idea of this is you can, in your parameters, you can validate. Most people don't. I mean, I don't see a whole lot. And if you're in a commercial module like DBA Tools, or you're in a SQL Server module or something that's commercial-ish, you get those, right? Because they don't want to have it break because somebody passed something in that the function expects to be there. So this case, duration in minutes, 1 to 480. If you pass in 500, it will validate invalid. So you'll get an error before it ever runs and finds out it breaks something. Especially if you're messing with databases or writing files and all of a sudden it breaks. after you did that. That's the wrong time to find out that your validation wasn't carried out. So validation in the parameters gives you anything you see here, like with the brackets above your parameter name, I call a decoration. That's what they call it in .NET. You're decorating your parameter, and there's lots of things you can do. Mandatory, you can do all sorts of things that you want to do if you're writing a function that makes certain things necessary. So validation is one of them. Null or empty. It can't be null or empty, guys. It has to be something. So if you pass in nothing on the server name, it will barf. It'll say, I'm sorry, you can't run this function. You're like, oh, thanks for that, because I would have really messed things up had I started to do things and overwrote my files and stuff like that. Validate range, validate set. You can say that can only be in these values. Here's the benefit to validate set. In many cases, you can actually tab complete and it will only give you these values. That's cool. That's a kind of a shortcut for you to help the user. Okay, that's nice to do. And validate pattern. You can use regex in the pattern. So, and then even have a script, validate script. So validation is huge if you're going to build functions that you want values to be in a certain way. And that way you can stop the running of that poor thing before you blow something up and then hit your parameter that you didn't validate and then it dies. So kind of cool, validation is very important. Begin process end. So begin process end is all about the pipeline. So whenever you pipe an object into a function, it runs the process thing multiple times. It runs it for as many things as you piped in. So remember, pipelining things, if I have an array and I pipeline 3 objects in, the process statement will run 3 times. Cool. Typically, you can intercept a pipeline input and put it into an input object parameter and then loop over that instead. So there's lots of ways to do it. If you want some good examples of pipelining, Spelunk the DBA tools module code, because it's script and it's out there online in the GitHub repository of DataPlat. It has tons of great examples of how do I pipeline this? How do I pass in 5 databases and you just do your thing? Great examples of how they handle pipelining of object arrays. So if you just need something, well, and now we have AI. So I mean, AI can tell you as well. But if you want core examples of things that work in real life, then you can go Spelunk some open source modules. But the principle is begin runs before the pipeline. So that's your setup code. Then your process runs once per object you've pipelined in, and runs and runs and runs and runs and runs. So you have to make sure you write it such that it supports pipelining. And then your end is the end deal. Clean up your clean up your connections, do something, close your files, whatever you're doing, that's the end thing. And it will run regardless of how many objects run through process. So this pattern is the tip. Don't be afraid to use these things. You'll find where you'll need it, and you'll find where you'll use it. They may be 2 different scenarios, need and use. But they're nice to have even if you don't do things now that you're not going to pipeline yet. It's not a bad idea to put a begin, process, and end in all your functions if you're maybe going to pipeline in the future. You're just dealing with one object now, or you pass in an array and a parameter and you go, yeah, I'd like to pipeline. It's already there now. And it doesn't hurt parsing. It's a good tip to decorate your functions with this begin, process, end and not have to do it later. You just fit stuff into those objects or those structures. So it's kind of cool. Splatting, this is not my favorite, but it is really close to my favorite thing in PowerShell. And I've been doing a ton of teaching on PowerShell for DBA stuff. And this is by far the thing that people resonate with as far as setting up their scenario. So it's basically a simple hash table, right? And we have arrays at parentheses, and it's an array. We have a hash table, at sign and curly brace. That begins our name and value. If you do it like you see and then do this thing, and I separate it by lines, I don't have to put commas. If I don't do that and I do it in one line, I have to do semicolons between the name and value pairs. That's the syntax. But it's readable if I do it by lines. And I just appreciate that more, because if I'm going to go modify it, I do this in my automations. I set up my function, and then I just splat it like you see at the bottom, invoke SQL CMD at P instead of $P. It takes that hash table, passes it in, matches the names of the names to the parameter names and puts the values in those parameters. And I'm out. I'm done. It's fantastic. If you omit one or do it to null, it's like a switch, right? So the switch is you just do dash online and you don't have a value. You can do online equals null, and it will just pass the switch in there as true, I mean. If you online equals true, it will pass it in as a switch. So you still aren't limited when it's switch parameters. But it's super good because look at the command line. I mean, invoke SQL CMD at P. Dude, that's easy to read, and I have the at P up here. The at P can have variables in it as far as values go. It can have whatever you want. It just has to be a hash table at the end, and then you can splat it. So splat, and you can multiple splat. I didn't put that on the slide, but you can multiple splat. I can have at P, at R, at S, and it will do all of them and put them into, and they're not by commas. Don't do by comma. Don't at P, comma. Commas are evil on the command line unless you're intending for things to become an array. It will interpret that the way that I just said. So don't do commas, just spaces. So at P, space, at R, space, at S. And you can populate them anywhere up here and have different things that pertain. And you can do at P and at R, not S. And then on the next one, at S. So you have this really super awesome structure to get you into the realm of what do I do? How do I get this to work really well? All right. I'm thinking I'm not going to make it. So PS bound parameters, this is used by VBA tools a lot. If you didn't pass in that parameter, it does something. It either, in the begin, it either validates and says you can't, or it says I need to do something different because the bound parameter was database. So cool feature. A lot of people don't do it. You can use contains key, and if it doesn't contain the key, then it didn't get passed. And that's important sometimes to know that that parameter didn't get passed. It means you're going to do all databases. Oh, okay. Objects, outputs, and formatting. Again, this slide deck will be up on my GitHub. It's github.com/dbaduck in presentations. So it's really easy to get to. And I think the conference will have them as well. So, and they'll be recorded, so you're good. But the PS custom object, for output streams, I just listed the streams in order. There's an output stream, a write error stream, a warning stream, a verbose stream, a debug stream, and an information stream. And write host actually is not a stream. It just writes to the information stream. Okay, so these are your avenues of getting data. And they are different streams, so they catch differently. So just be aware that using the PS custom object is nice to just get a nice hash table that becomes an object. And then you also have the streams. Use the right one. There's lots of ways. If you write warning, it'll go to the warning stream and it'll turn yellow. Cool. Write verbose will go to the verbose stream. So if you're not doing dash verbose for your function call, you won't ever see those. It'll go to the verbose stream and it'll be ignored if you didn't say dash verbose. So now you don't have to do write host to everything. You can write them to the right stream and they'll get caught where you are debugging, whether you're warning, all that stuff. So it's really nice. Streams are important to understand. Comparison operators. The real big tip here is that match is one of those really cool ones that most people don't use. If you do a dash match, you can actually capture the matches and say which one's matched. And most people don't know that that's a thing. There's always the like with the wildcards, and there's always the other ones where you're doing greater than or in or contains or whatever. But match is one of those ones that you get to use regex. So if you're good at regex, if you're not, AI will help you. But that returns a matches object that gets you the idea of which one's matched. So that's a nice way to interrogate that. Performance in parallel. So really, again, the idea of measure command will tell you how things worked in the milliseconds or whatever. So T equals measure command and then run the command. it'll return how it measured it. So it'll have milliseconds and seconds and all this stuff, and you just get to decide which property you want to interrogate. This one interrogates the total milliseconds and tells you that this is how long it took. So this is the example of the array where you 1.5000 and you array plus equals. You want to see how long that runs. And you change the 5,000 to 10, 100, a million, and see what you get. But measure command just lets you do that. And it will always run the stuff in the command, and then it will put the timeline. You can use stopwatch. You can use get the date and do a diff for time span. You can do all sorts of things. This is just one way to, like, I need to know how long it's going to run. And loop choice matters a lot. Again, this is really just illustrating the idea of how you loop through your object. So pipeline first, pipeline for each object, $_ times 2. And it's the slowest because it has to create the copy, right? That's why it's slower. And again, your mileage will vary. It depends on how many objects are in the numbers or what type of objects are in the numbers. If you're just doing ints, you won't see a massive difference. Numbers for each means you didn't pipeline, so that's a nice way to loop. And then for each in there is the fastest, but I will say again, faster and fastest, there's a really short line in this demo. So don't run them thinking, oh my gosh, it's the same, he lied. I get it, totally. Start doing it with real stuff, and you'll see that there is a difference. Just the difference will vary based on what you run it against. But the fastest is because you are taking one object at a time instead of letting the object do a dot for each. But again, your mileage will go based on the tip was just about, it's easy to think pipelining. And we covered this before, so just don't always think pipelining is going to be the fastest way to go that way. For loops, loops are inevitable inside our automations. For each with parallel, so in 5.1 we have for each object, then we do our thing. That's great. Now we have a for each object with dash parallel, which gives us some luxury in that let PowerShell throttle it. And you can set the throttle limit, as you can see on the bottom. You can set the throttle limit to 8 and say you can only parallel 8. If you have 4 cores and you parallel 24, what's going to happen? You're not naturally throttled because CPU only has so many cores, so it can't run 2 things on the core at one time. It has to wait, so it's got to be so parallel more than you have processors. Probably not going to help you much, but you can do it. It just won't benefit you much. But parallel gives you a nice way to throttle that with PowerShell 7. We get the dash parallel scenario, and that's almost like running run spaces in the background, right? So it's kind of handy. And then last but not least, group, search, and measure. So you can group objects, which will give you a object name. If you group by object name, it will actually give you the name and then how many. So that's kind of like a group by in SQL to say, hey, I'm using this number and I want this many, and see how many come out. Sort, or select, on the right-hand side, select will give you the ability to select little things out. Know that when you use select object, it does become an object unless you use expand property. And expand property isn't in here because we are dealing with objects and you'll get an object back. But there is a way to get one string back that's really a string instead of an object. Again, depends on what your goal is, so whatever problem you're trying to solve. And then the last one is all about measure object again. Measure object will pass, you can get the content, pass it to measure object, and it will do sum, count, all the things that you can aggregate, and you can pick whichever one you want. You can actually tell it on the measure object. It says line and word and character. I can say dash sum and give it a property, and it will sum those up and give that to me in the sum property. So the measure object is a cool thing. Again, it uses the pipeline. There's no dot measure objects. Don't worry. You have to pipeline. So again, there's some things you pipeline, some things you don't. And your mileage will vary based on the object type, the size of the object, and what you're trying to get out. But I've used it in SMO and other things, and it's really, really kind of nice. The select object, not select object, select string is like a grep. So if you've ever wanted to know if something is in a file, you can say get content and pass it to, or pipeline it to select string and say Bob. If Bob's in that file, it will tell you the line it's in. So it's kind of cool. It's kind of a grep-ish thing. You don't get as much power in grep because grep can do a lot of fun things with regex, and select string is kind of limited to what PowerShell allows you to do. But select string is a really nice way to do that. The last couple are null. You'll see this in Visual Studio Code. It is best practice to use null on the left, not on the equals null. It's actually proper to say $null equals something or $null not equals something because of the way PowerShell works. Visual Studio Code will actually give you a little squiggly line underneath that and say, you probably should put that on the left. And so just practice-wise, just a little tip to go, hey, you probably should just go over here and do that. And it just mentions that arrays are the caveat to that. So you want to put it on the left because if you put it on the right, it doesn't always work for arrays. So just be aware. Let's see, matches. We talked about matches. Grid view. I don't know how many people use grid view. It's not effective on Linux, so if you use this on Linux, it's not the way it works. But the out grid view is a good way to let you filter things. If you do the pass-through, this is the tip. If you use pass-through, it will let you actually select them in the out grid view and click OK, and it will pass the ones you selected to the next thing. Kind of a built-in way to filter things if you're trying to get there. And the grid view does let you do searches on it and filter them, and then you pick them and say OK. So it's kind of a nice little thing. Convert to JSON. It don't understand JSON very well. Let's see what else we need to know. Oh, that's it. Yeah, okay, so we're done with that. So key takeaways, don't use plus equals. That's just the way it is. Filter from left to right, and the rightmost is format. Remember that format commands will not give you a very good thing if you do $variable equals and then the format is at the right. You'll get garbage. It won't be an object anymore. It will be format data, which is not helpful at all. But format should be on the right so you can get it looking the way you want if you're on the command line. Commandlet binding costs you nothing. It actually doesn't cost you a thing. It just gives you features for free. So don't hesitate to use that. Know your output streams. If you need verbose, write verbose so that you can say -verbose when you run it and you can get those extra pieces of information that tell you how it's running. DBA Tools uses this very well. They write verbose, and we get that. If we say -verbose, we can see exactly, I'm opening up the connection. I'm connecting to the database. I'm doing, just because sometimes it's nice to troubleshoot where it went wrong instead of just getting an error in the end, and you're like, well, where did it go wrong? If you write with verbose, you get the run, oof, it failed, and you, that's where, again, you can file a bug or whatever. So it's nice. Parallel is a superpower of PowerShell 7. Again, it doesn't make everything amazing, but it is a tool, so don't hesitate to use that tool. And then group object, select string, and null to the left, just little things that you could use to help make your life better. So thank you. Where's my thing? I thought I put it on here. DBA Duck. Yeah, I'll put a link out on dbaduck.com that just points to my GitHub repository. It's in the presentations link, and they'll just have a link to the presentation so you don't have to memorize a GitHub repo name. But it's right there in the Find Me thing, so if you want to take a picture, the Find Me has github.com, DBA Duck, and presentations. That's where I'll put them this week with the demo. I actually have a demo code that I didn't do because of time, but I have that so you can play with it and don't have to get it all out of the slide deck. And again, feedback is key. This is my first PowerShell Summit. It's my first sessions here at the Summit, and it's fun. I've been presenting for years, but it always is nice to know perspectives of what you liked, what you didn't like. Should I do something different? Did I miss a tip that would be awesome for my presentation to make it better? It's all about giving back. I've been giving back for many, many years because I grew up on the shoulders of giants. Feedback is everything for getting the giant to grow. So don't hesitate to the ones that you've already went to. Give them feedback. Tell them even if it's just, I loved it. Just don't change anything. It's better that we hear that than silence. Doesn't really help us in silence. So please give feedback for the presentations you've been to. And thank you for being here. I think this is the last session, I think, other than the whatever. Question?
No, I was just going to point out the schedule says you're good until noon. You got another 30 minutes.
Excuse me? I'm good till noon? Yeah. Oh, you guys, that is so good. Okay, so we're going to have a party. So that's great news. Yep, go ahead.
So the array list, great stuff, by the way. Your array list is actually deprecated, so you should all.
Oh, is that why they're not using it anymore? Okay, I got you.
And then the plus minus, or the plus equals, actually got like a 90% enhancement version 7.5.
Did it? That's why it changed. When I did the demo on my own site, I'm going to see how performant it was. The plus equals actually didn't perform so badly as it used to. It's just sage advice, right? But yeah,
Your other two
interesting.
those are still fast.
Yeah, okay.
And while you're doing it,
Okay.
10 seconds versus 5 minutes.
Okay, all right, yeah, so there's some benefits to those things. I forgot ArrayList is deprecated because of .NET, and it's fun, but thank you for that, that's great, it's awesome.
Have you tried by reversing the array to make use of the reverse method of this object design? Because I have in mind that stating to the last object in an array could take ages as this object, as this array is really, really huge. So I just wanted to know if the method will be any kind faster or not.
Boy, that's a great question. You're just speaking about the array index? Yeah, so that's a good question. I have not done it on really large arrays because I have an aversion to arrays. But yet, I mean, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know if it's scalable performance, honestly, by using the negatives. It's supposed to be, but that's a great question. Good. I'm gonna have to test that now. Thanks for that. That's good. Yeah, we have a lot of time, guys. That's crazy. Yeah, let me fire up my VMs then. That's awesome. Okay, so, and it's not on. I'm sorry. Yep, we'll just fire them up. So are there any tips that you guys have used, like commonly, that you found to be very, very helpful? Okay. Yeah, so I don't know that I said that. Write output and write host are two different streams, right? The output stream is what goes into the pipeline. So that's what goes out of the output stream. And that's what you catch when you do a $sign variable equals this. That's what you catch. I would never do a write output as opposed to write host because they are two different streams. The write host just bypasses the output, so you can still do things like write verbose, except you'll see them without doing the verbose stream, like doing -verbose. So write host is actually, it's not as evil as it used to be. It used to be pretty evil. Same with the out commands, right? Where you pipe it to out-null or pipe it to out-file and stuff like that. It used to be they sucked like really bad. In version 2 and 3, they were like an anti-pattern. Like, don't ever do that. But you gave them to us, thank you, but that's a terrible idea. And I attended something with Don Jones and his last farewell down in Vegas. And I made that comment in front of Don Jones. And Don was like, I don't know that I'd say that. I'm like, okay. And he demonstrated it. And it's screaming fast on the out commands. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll abolish that. That wasn't in my tips. The out commands still work great, apparently. And so that's a good way to get something to the output stream. But yeah, the write host is just a cheat to get it to the console, because otherwise it doesn't show up. The information stream, you have to capture it. And write host uses that, but the information stream is the console. So if you're using transcripts, that's the one tip I did not add here, because I had hoped that everybody just uses transcripts by default. But I know a lot of people don't do that by default. It's in my profile. As soon as I fire up PowerShell, it starts a transcript. End of story. It just does, because I want to know what happened. And that means that when I run an automation, it just happens to. So I like that a lot more. But transcripting is really cool. I even have a function that actually will tell you if you're in a transcript. I got that from the PowerShell team, because I have no idea how to do that. But again, enough tips we had, but I did not know I had that much time. So, because I started at 10:30. That means I had an hour and a half? God, you guys, somebody blew the schedule up because the new schedule only said I had till 11:15 or something like that. So I must not have looked close enough. So yeah, let's go into this one. All right, let's go here.
Can I ask you a question about the pipeline?
Yep.
Piping an object into your commandlet binding. Say I'm piping an array into that, and the process handles it one element at a time. If I instead use that same commandlet to handle the data from the parameter, do I have to handle it as an array, or does it automatically break it up?
It handles it as the type. So in the pipeline, whenever you pipe data into the pipeline, you have to tell it where it goes. Okay, so you have to tell it what variable. So in your parameters, there's a accept pipeline input, and you can say by parameter name or by value. And so that's what would be populated by that pipe. So you pipe an array in, and it would go into that object. So that object would have to be an appropriate type. Most often it's object, an array, or it's a specific type. DBA Tools uses both. They actually say you can only pass in SQL instances, or you can only pass in databases, and it validates that. But if you just did a commandlet binding and you did a pipeline into, the process would process the process block would execute once per object. The trick is you have to decide how you're going to handle that. So DBA Tools has two ways they handle it. And that's the examples I went in and looked at to see how it works, is they actually assign the pipeline input to an input object variable. And in the process object, they actually iterate through that input object. And so sometimes they do that. And otherwise, they do the pipeline that says, hey, my PS item or my $sign underscore is the one I'm going to operate on. So it just depends on how they work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Pipelining's great. But again, is it like intuitive to your brain? No. You have to think about it for a while.
As an additional note to splitting, you have to be aware that if you have some kind of complex variable object, you can't make use of subproperties. So basically to say I have a variable and there is an object, and one of those properties is basically a hash table, you can't not use it as prospective. It just has to be one, the hash table just has to be on its own variable.
Okay. So the comment was that if you have a hash table and use it in Splat, you don't get the benefit of having an object in the value and using those object subproperties in this.
For instance, variable x dot, and then I dot to my hash table in the variable x doesn't work. It just has to be that one variable has to be, or x has to be the hash table.
So they have to be singletons. They can't be objects that you can operate on within that Splat. Yeah, so that's great, a great comment. I have not tried to pass an object in. So I've never experienced that, but that's because I didn't do that. Okay.
What you also could mention are PS default parameter values, because basically they act the same way as a hash table for splitting, but they are always present. So every time I define PS default parameter value set, for instance, like write invoke REST method, and I have some kind of authentication heading, and I don't have to write this for every single time I use that command, because then I can make it up like a lookup table, which follows along through the whole session while I define it. So it's somewhat the behavior of this blood, but always present during your runtime as you have defined it.
And the variable's called PS.
PS default parameter value.
Oh, PS default parameter values. Okay, all right. I have not used that one. I've used bound parameters, not that one. So I'll have to experiment with that one. That was an interesting idea. Yeah. So it looks like I have this all set up and my repo does not have my file. So that means it didn't get uploaded. So I apologize, it's not even in my online repo. So I guess that, yeah, after all of that, we don't have a demo. so I apologize. I'm happy to take anything you want to do, but we don't have a canned demo. So if there's something you want to see, we can certainly address that here. If not, then we can adjourn, and then lunch is at noon, right? So you're a little early for lunch. All right.
Any examples of the command line binding being used to pipe something or to be used inside of a pipe? I was interested in that.
As far as?
I don't know, like taking a commandlet and then piping it to like a function, and then you have command line binding set up and investigating that. If not, it's fine.
Yeah, I don't have one set up for that. No.
That would take a little bit more scaffolding.
Yeah, it would. I mean, yeah, there's more. Yeah, there's more to it than that. I mean, I wish I had a canned one for you, but I don't have that. So, if there's nothing more, thank you for coming. Hopefully you had a great summit, and go ahead. Yep.
So I'm fairly new to PowerShell, so the pipeline is not as intuitive to me. It just creates functions.
Uh-huh.
So I'm always thinking there's probably a better way to do some pipelines, a long script. Is there any rule of thumb for this operation that's faster with pipeline versus the function?
So the rule of thumb that you could use for what should I do, when should I use a pipeline, when shouldn't I, is the larger the objects, the more likely you're going to be faster not using the pipeline and doing something else like passing them into. The best example I have is that there's code where you would do a get dash process and pipe that to a for each, rather than doing your, and this for each would be like get service name and then use it in $_ Where you gain a lot is when they're small objects and you just don't want to write the plumbing, right? Plumbing is what matters a lot in how fast things are when you think about pipelining. The bigger piece though, wow, and Visual Studio Code, GitHub Copilot just let me, I think you can see that, yeah, it just wrote me a nice function. But the idea is that when we talked about get dash process with a dash name, that's faster than filtering it after the fact with where, right, with the pipeline. A lot of commandlets that deal with data have an input object parameter or a input data parameter, and you pass it in there. It is faster to pass it in there than it is to pipeline it to there and have it land in the input object. So the larger the objects, that's the rule of thumb. Larger the objects, the more likely you're going to suffer from a pipeline than not if you do it a different way. Pass it into a function or do dot for each or dot where and filter it down. So just think of that. Smaller, you're going to benefit from the pipeline because it's smaller and you're not going to take up as much memory and it's not going to have to digest. The other rule of thumb is numbers of objects. So if you're going to pipe 100,000 objects into that next pipe, you probably should think of a different way to do that. For each name in something and iterate through it that way. The pipeline will just, because it's copying it and then iterating, because pipelines do what to a function? Make it run once per object. So now your process is going to run, your process block is going to run once per 100,000 objects. So numbers of objects, size of objects. If you're on the right-hand side of big, you tend to shy away from quickly using pipelines as your first line of defense. Otherwise, you're going to iterate some other way. So it isn't true in everything, but for a rule of thumb, that's what I do. If I'm going to have hundreds of thousands of things or big objects, I'm not going to, iteration with a pipeline is not as advantageous. If I have 2 or 3 of them, I get away with the convenience. And the convenience means a lot to me with just down and dirty. If I'm writing automations, I don't do that because I want to scale. What if that 3 became 30 and they're 1 meg objects? Then I die, right? And so I'd rather it scale better than not better. So if I'm going to have the potential, and I don't have a crystal ball, but if I'm gonna think about doing that thing, just like having begin, process, end, even though my function isn't gonna do pipelining yet, I'd still put it in there. Readability gives me the ability to do something before, just nice, but it's gonna be all about big. The bigger, the less likely you're gonna just quickly go in your automation to pipelining. Yep. Any other questions? So the example I have is using SQL, and it still wants to give me that service name, which is cool. The SQL side, there is that's not it. So we'll just do that in here. So if I invoke -SQL CMD, and I get my, come on, Copilot, you were writing it, and then you stopped writing it. That's just sad. If I get my data query and select star from whatever, and I put that in a variable, the idea of not using the pipeline and using an object is that you'll get data back here, and it could be big. I could bring back 10,000 rows, and the rows could be 8K, which could be quite a large piece of data. This guy I have to protect with my cycle saved, cycle earned principle. Mostly because if I have to do something special to this because it's data, I'm going to make sure I understand what I can do with invoke SQL CMD or invoke -DBA query to say output as data table, so that it brings it back in a data table format. And again, you want to leverage everything the commandlet has to offer to make your life better. If I don't do that, the default is by row. And if I get back a data row, that isn't a data table. So I can't turn around and say write -DBA or write -SQL table data, because it only works with data tables. So if I have to convert var into a data table, which it will do for you, but it's brutal because it does it in a bad way. It does it in a not so performant way because it's brute force. It just creates a new data table, starts shoving data. Now you've duplicated the objects like you're pipelining it. So if you're pipelining a big data set into write and you didn't have a data table, it will convert it again. So now I have one copy of big. I have a pipeline of the variable that's not a data table. It creates a new data table. Now I have 3 copies with one pipeline. So typically the advice is to use the benefits of the commandlet to give it back in the way that's native to what you're going to do with it. So if I'm going to do write SQL table data because I capture data every day, I'm going to capture it out as a data table so I can just pass it in. And I don't pipeline it. The recommendation is saying data pipeline write SQL table data. Instead, I say write -SQL table data with a input data at the end, as you see, input data, and pass it in as a parameter rather than copying it on the command line, the pipeline. Sorry, so I just pass it in as a variable or a parameter, and that's much more efficient. Again, it still marshals it by value, but it doesn't do the same thing as a pipeline does. Because now, what happens if I pipeline? The process runs once for every object I pass. Now again, if I'm passing a data table 1, then the process thing runs once. So I get away with it with some functions. In this case, the passing it into input data gives it a full data table and lets it operate on it the best way, right? And I know what's going on under the covers of this commandlet. It's using SQL bulk copy and it requires a data table. So it just uses that thing straight out. So again, little tips of when do I use pipeline, when do I not use pipelines? I would be aware of this. And I've tested the performance, and the performance is by far better doing it this way than doing it this way, by far. Like even in DBA tools, it's the same speed. It's just faster if you pass it in as an input object as opposed to pipelining it. And it's just because what Jeffrey said last session, the pipeline does things and it's for free, but you have to be aware of what it's doing and how much you're passing into it before you just obliterate yourself, because you can. I wrote a one-liner, congratulations, but that one-liner took down your server. Well, it was in one line. I know. Name that tune does not exist in PowerShell, I promise. One note doesn't matter. So that's a big piece of advice is anytime you have a parameter, use it. I mean, it's not evil to pass a pipeline, but it's not as efficient than doing it in the parameter ecosystem. So super helpful that way. Anything else? Awesome. Well, thanks for that. Still, I guess if you want to ding me for not having a demo for an hour and a half, I guess you can. But again, anything you want to share or that could make this better for the next people who watch it, because this will live on for more than this summit, please share that. And don't forget to share that with other people that you've went to their sessions. So I guess we're going to go to lunch. It's 15 minutes early, but hey, we're good. We got through everything and we're happy. Guess we're done.